I was cleaning the cabinet in our living room when I found a box we hadn't opened in years. I couldn't even remember what was inside anymore. I looked around our home in silence. Every corner was filled with things that once felt important, but now simply sat there collecting dust. It wasn't the number of things that confused me. It was how the fuller our home became, the more crowded my life seemed to feel. I quietly asked myself a question I couldn't ignore. Did we own all these things? Or were these things slowly beginning to own us? My name is Clara. The day we decided to sell almost everything we owned didn't feel like losing something, but like the beginning of finding our life again. The morning unfolded the way it usually did. Armand was getting ready for work, while Mira searched everywhere for her school bag that had somehow disappeared. I joined her search, and 5 minutes quietly became 15. Every drawer, box, and crowded shelf asked to be opened one by one. After they left, I started putting the house back in order. The more I finished, the more other things quietly seemed to ask for my attention. In the storage room, I found 3 empty plastic bins I had once bought to make the house feel organized. Somehow, they now needed storage space of their own. That afternoon, I opened our banking app to pay the monthly bills. Along with the mortgage and household expenses, there was also the small storage unit we had been renting because the house could no longer hold everything. I paused as I looked at the numbers on the screen. It was not because we couldn't pay them, but because I quietly wondered when so much of our spending had become about taking care of our belongings. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt full, yet the space inside me somehow felt smaller than ever. A few days later, I began seeing our home differently. Every crowded shelf quietly felt like another unfinished task waiting for me. I dusted each small decoration in the living room one by one. Then it struck me that I had spent more time caring for them than truly noticing them. While organizing the kitchen cabinet, I found appliances that were still inside their original boxes. I had bought them because I believed I would use them often someday. I smiled quietly to myself. I realized I hadn't bought those things because I needed them, but because I imagined a different version of my life. That afternoon, Armand looked for a screwdriver we were sure we had bought. We searched through drawers, boxes, and cabinets, but none of us knew where it had gone. I realized I wasn't tired because of the housework itself. I was tired from trying to remember everything we owned. That night, I opened our family's spending notebook. For the first time, I marked every expense that existed simply because we owned too many things. The short list I made turned out to be much longer than I expected. It included storage costs, extra shelves, organizer bins, maintenance supplies, and even replacements for things we already owned. I stared at the numbers for a long time without saying anything. I had always believed we were spending money on our family, but much of it was simply keeping our belongings organized. A few days later, I opened my closet again. Several clothes had not been worn for years, yet every time I thought about donating them, I quietly told myself, maybe I'll need them someday. I slowly realized the hardest part was never the objects themselves. It was the memories, the hopes, and the quiet guilt attached to each one. As I watched Mira in the living room, I noticed she kept returning to the same few favorite toys. Dozens of others remained neatly arranged on the shelf, untouched. A quiet feeling began to settle in. The more we owned, the less open space seemed to remain for simply enjoying our home. I wasn't ready to say we needed to change everything, but for the first time, I began to wonder if our house wasn't too small after all. We were simply carrying more than it could quietly hold. Life around us continued the way it always had. Armand went to work, Mira left for school, and I cared for a home that looked perfectly fine from the outside. One afternoon, Armand smiled and said, "Our home is so full now. There are memories in every corner." His voice carried quiet appreciation. I smiled back. But inside, I no longer saw memories. I saw the work waiting every time my eyes moved across the room. Weekends were supposed to be our time to rest together. Somehow, nearly half the day disappeared into cleaning, reorganizing, and moving things from one place to another. I began noticing something. We rarely said, "Let's play together," and much more often said, "Not yet, Mom is still cleaning." Our house was full. Little by little, I felt those belongings were filling more than the shelves. They were filling the time that should have belonged to our family. That night, I turned off the living room lights later than usual. Looking at the crowded shelves, I quietly wondered when all of this had started to feel more important than time we could never get back. The next morning, I decided to open a few old boxes stored in the garage. I simply wanted to see what we had been keeping all this time. I took each item out one by one. There were kitchen tools we never used, decorations I had forgotten, and so many things that once felt important. In the middle of the pile, Mira walked over carrying a small box. Looking curious, she asked, "Mom, why do we keep all of this if we never use it?" I didn't answer right away. My hand stopped around a vase I couldn't even remember seeing in years. A few minutes later, Mira was sitting inside an empty box, laughing to herself. "I like the box. There's so much room to play in here." I looked around the crowded garage. Then my eyes returned to Mira, who had found happiness in the empty space left behind by just one opened box. In that quiet moment, something became clear to me. Maybe what our family needed wasn't a bigger house, but more room to truly live together. That night, I couldn't fall asleep right away. Mira's simple words kept circling in my mind, quietly pointing towards something I had never really noticed before. The next morning, I went back into the storage room by myself. As I picked up each item, I quietly asked, when was the last time this truly made our lives better? Most of the time, I couldn't remember the answer. What remained was only the habit of keeping things, preparing for someday, and feeling guilty about letting them go. Then I opened our family budget from the past few months. The more I looked, the clearer it became that our spending had quietly grown along with everything we were keeping. We bought shelves so we could store more things. Then we bought boxes to organize those shelves, and our weekends slowly disappeared into taking care of it all. That was the moment something finally became clear to me. We weren't building a more comfortable life. We were spending our time taking care of the things that were supposed to help us. I finally understood what letting go really meant. It wasn't about losing the things we owned, but about no longer letting them take the space, time, and attention that belonged to our family. That night, after Mira had fallen asleep, I asked Armand to sit with me at the dining table. There were no laptops or phones between us, only 2 warm cups of tea. I quietly told him that I felt we spent too much time taking care of our belongings. Somewhere along the way, it felt like we had stopped enjoying the home itself. Armand stayed quiet for a moment before looking around the dining room. It was as if he was noticing how full every corner had become for the first time. I showed him the small list I had written. Storage costs, organizers, maintenance, and other expenses quietly traced back to the number of things we had kept. Armand nodded slowly as he looked at the page. He said he had always believed those things made life more comfortable, but now they might have been doing the opposite. I held his hand and smiled a little. I told him I wasn't hoping for a bigger house, only a life that felt lighter. Armand smiled back and answered quietly that we could begin one step at a time. We would keep what we truly needed and let go of the rest, so our home could feel like a place to live again. That weekend, we started with one small cabinet in the living room. We agreed not to rush, taking only one item at a time. Before placing anything into the box, I asked myself one quiet question. Does this truly support the life we want to build, or does it only remind us of the past? Some things stayed because we truly used them. Many more quietly left our home, taking their memories with them without continuing to fill every corner. A few weeks later, the living room felt different. Not because we bought new furniture, but because empty space had finally replaced the piles that used to be there. One afternoon, Mira spread out her puzzle on the floor without moving boxes or storage baskets first. She patted the space beside her and smiled. "Mom, it's nice to sit here now." I sat beside her without feeling that I needed to get up and tidy something. For the first time in a long while, our home felt calmer. Not because everything was perfect, but because we finally had room to simply be present. I realized that selling so many of our belongings was never about living with less. It was about making more room for the things we had quietly missed for a long time, peace and being together. Our home isn't as full as it used to be anymore. The quiet, empty corners remind me that not every space has to be filled. I still follow the clean slate strategy in my daily life. Whenever it's hard to let something go, I quietly ask myself whether it supports our family's future or simply keeps me attached to the past. Little by little, I see that wealth isn't only measured by what we own. Sometimes it feels like having more time, a lighter mind, and a home that echoes with laughter instead of belongings. If our story feels familiar to you, I'd love for you to continue this journey with our little family by subscribing to Clara's Family Journal. This is a place where we learn together, taking one small step at a time toward a healthier financial and emotional life. Now, I'd like to ask you something. If you could keep only 5 things in your home today, what would you choose?